I hadn't been back in a few months. Life kept me busy, but truthfully, I'd been avoiding the house, avoiding the stillness, the silence that clung to the walls like dust. My father called me 2 nights ago, out of the blue. Said he needed to see me. No details, no small talk. Just a quiet, trembling voice asking if I could come by early, before work. When I pulled into the gravel driveway this morning, just after 7, the sky was a soft gray and the air still held a hint of chill. The old screen door creaked as I stepped into the kitchen. The same one I grew up in, faint smell of burned coffee, chipped tiles, and that stubborn creak in the wooden floorboard by the fridge. It all hit me at once, like memory had muscle. Dad was already sitting at the table. His hands were clasped, knuckles white. He didn't look at me when I walked in. Didn't offer a greeting, just nudged a manila folder across the table. I used your emergency fund, he said, eyes still on the floor, to pay off your brother's bail. I didn't sit down right away. Just stared at the folder. My mind went blank and then flooded all at once. What, was all I could say. My voice barely made it past my throat. Inside the folder were documents, neatly arranged, painfully thorough. Bank transfer slips, printed emails, a formal notice from a debt collection agency, and a court summary with my brother's name on it. I didn't recognize half the paperwork, but the total at the bottom of one statement made my stomach turn. It was my emergency fund. Every dollar I had set aside in case my health took a turn. My endometriosis had been getting worse, and I was planning for surgery in the coming months. That money was my safety net. My last bit of control in a body that betrayed me more often than I could count. How did you even get access? I asked, flipping through the pages with shaky hands. He finally looked up. I found your old bank paperwork in the drawer. The passwords were still on the sticky note. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Not just from the betrayal, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. Without asking? I said. Without even telling me? His face tightened. Your brother needed help. They would have put him away this time, and we both know he wouldn't survive that. There it was. The pattern. Again. He was always the one who got saved. Even when I was the one drowning. I was 12 when he wrecked the truck and lied about it. You let me take the blame so he wouldn't lose his license. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. No apology. Just that same quiet justification. He's your brother, he said. Family comes first. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, but something inside me cracked. And what about me? I asked, my voice dry and steady. When do I come first? The silence after that was thick. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to pause. I sat down, slowly. My hands were still on the folder. There was something else tucked into the back sleeve. A notarized letter. I pulled it out. It was dated 3 weeks ago. And it listed my brother, Daniel, as a partial beneficiary on the same account I'd set up for my surgery. You had this notarized? I said, my voice rising. You actually made it official? Dad looked away again. I thought you'd understand. Someday. You went behind my back and signed away my money. And you think I'll just get over it? He didn't answer. That letter might as well have been a brick to the chest. Not just betrayal, but a cold, legal stamp that said I didn't matter. Not enough. Not even close. I remembered staying up all night with Mom when the chemo made her too sick to sleep. Daniel never came around. He was busy, or traveling. And I'd still been the one to cook, clean, sit through hospice meetings, hold her hand at the end. Now, this? I pressed my lips together, the weight of every silence I'd swallowed crashing into my chest. I'm not angry because you helped him, I said. I'm angry because you sacrificed me to do it. The folder sat open between us like a wound. I wanted to walk out, slam the door behind me, and never come back. But something held me there. Maybe it was the same stubbornness that kept me taking care of a family that didn't know how to care back. Or maybe I just needed to see what else he was hiding. I reached for the letter again, eyes scanning it line by line. Then I saw it. A signature. Not mine. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, though the engine was still warm and the dashboard clock said 20 minutes had passed since I stormed out of the house. The folder rested on my lap. My fingers trembled as I opened it again. The transfer form sat there, bold as ever. There it was. My name, my signature, clear, confident, unmistakable. But I hadn't signed it. My eyes locked on the date in the upper corner. That week, I'd been in Atlanta on a business trip, holed up in a hotel conference room presenting to a panel of sleep-deprived executives. I hadn't even been in the state. I stared harder, willing it to disappear. Wishing it made sense. Who forged this? I whispered. I already knew the answer. Dad? Daniel? Maybe both? The air in the car was thick, humid, almost sour from the tension wrapping around my chest. My skin prickled with betrayal, but worse, it felt like I'd been erased. I wasn't just stolen from. I'd been written out. I grabbed my phone and snapped pictures of every page, every receipt, every signature. I didn't say anything out loud after that except one thing, just above a whisper. They really thought I wouldn't notice. The courthouse parking lot was half empty. I shifted the car into gear and pulled away slowly, still gripping the steering wheel too tight. Downtown Montgomery was a blur of red lights and rusted storefront signs as I headed toward the bank. I didn't bother calling first. I needed answers, now. The branch was quiet when I walked in. Mr. Harlan, the same man who'd opened my first account when I was 22, looked up from his computer with a polite, slightly strained smile. "Tierney," he said, "good to see you. Can we talk in your office?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He gestured toward the hallway without a word. The second the door closed behind me, I opened the folder on his desk. "I need to know who accessed my account," I said. "And how? Because this signature?" I tapped the paper. "It's not mine." He took a deep breath, opened his drawer, and pulled up my profile on the screen. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard. "There was a visit. Your father came in. About 6 weeks ago. Alone?" He nodded. "Yes. He brought power of attorney documents. Said you were unwell. That he was managing your affairs temporarily." Unwell. That word again. They used that word for my mother when she started forgetting things. When they stopped letting her sign her own checks. And now they'd used it for me. My mouth went dry. Did he show ID? Yes. Everything checked out, legally. He looked uncomfortable. I didn't care. So all it takes is a story and a form, and I lose access to my own life? He looked down. It's legal if the paperwork is valid. I stood up without another word. The chair scraped loudly against the carpet, breaking the silence like a crack of thunder. As I stepped outside, the sky was still overcast. A warm breeze brushed my face, but it didn't calm me. I heard my mother's voice in my head, like it came from the air itself. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. I didn't cry, not there, but something inside began to twist, tighten, harden. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a pattern, and I'd been raised to accept it. The ride home was silent. I passed places that had once meant something, old diners, the bridge where we used to skip rocks, the church with the broken bell tower. Nothing looked the same now. Inside the house, Dad was still at the kitchen table, flipping through the local paper like nothing had happened. I walked in and sat across from him. Calm, controlled. "You forged my name," I said. He looked up slowly, then shrugged. "It's still family money. You'll get it back one day." "Who signed it?" I asked again. He didn't answer, just stared. That silence said everything. Then the phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Daniel, of course. I picked up. "Hey," he said, too casually. "Just checking in. You okay?" I said nothing. You know how Dad gets. He means well. "Don't," I said flatly. "Look, this is all a misunderstanding. I didn't know. You stole from me," I said. "And you thought I'd thank you for it." Silence. Then he hung up. Dad finally spoke. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I stood up. "I'm done being reasonable." I walked down the hall to my old bedroom. The smell of dust and aged paper greeted me. Everything was frozen in time, trophies from school, posters peeling from the wall, a dried-out music box still on the dresser. I opened the bottom drawer of my nightstand and pulled out an old journal. I flipped through the pages until I found one. Dated June 4, 1997. "One day, I'll have my own life, and no one will touch what's mine." The ink was smudged. I must have cried when I wrote it. I shut the book slowly, breathing through the sting in my chest. This wasn't about money anymore. I needed to call Jordan, my friend from college. She worked at a firm in Birmingham. But not yet. Not before I knew exactly what I was up against. I needed proof. A plan. I closed the folder, rested it on my lap, and stared out the window. The trees outside barely moved, heavy with moisture. You taught me to be quiet, I whispered. But I learned to wait. The phone buzzed just as I was stacking old invoices on the coffee table, light tapping, nothing urgent. I glanced at the screen, but didn't recognize the number. I hesitated, didn't answer right away. I'd grown comfortable avoiding calls from my father, from Daniel, from the people I used to call family. Still, something nudged me. I pressed accept. Tierney? The voice was soft, tinted with hesitation. My cousin Melanie. I hadn't spoken to her in years. I'm sorry to call so late, she said. But I found something. You need to know. My heart skipped a beat. What is it? I asked, keeping tone calm. She told me they filed a legal declaration, over a year ago, that declared me mentally unfit to manage my finances. Signed, filed, sitting in court. Her voice trembled slightly. I saw the filing while helping Mom's estate work, she explained. Stiffness spread across my shoulders. I closed the ledger on the table. The walls of my downtown apartment, dusty boxes from when I moved out of the parent house, seemed to close in. They'd erased me, legally, silently. I asked for a scan. She sent it moments later. The document glowed on my phone screen like a betrayal. My father's signature. Daniel's name as witness. A date that aligned with no memory I have. I sat still. No tears. No rage yet. Just a cold clarity. They had built a case to erase me before I even knew I was fighting. I printed every line. Pinned the page to the corkboard beside the window. The city lights filtered in, casting long shadows over the words. I stared at the clause. Due to concerns of mental incapacity, financial management to be transferred, my name faded into linen page. At 10, I remember watching Dad and Daniel sit in the living room, serious voices, hushed tones. I was told, "You're too emotional, Tierney. Let the men handle it." I learned compliance. Quiet existence. Tonight I realized compliance meant being erased. I gathered every old email, every statement where I had signed for my mother's hospital, every memo where I'd been considered capable. I bookmarked a lawyer in Birmingham, drafted an email, but didn't send it yet. This wasn't about impulse. It was strategy. I sat at the mirror in my bathroom, brushing damp hair back. My reflection looked steady, older, worn, but alive. I rehearsed what I would say if they asked. I'm not unwell, I'm invisible. And I'm waking up. I created a folder named Reclamation. Inside, copies, notes, photos, logs. I logged the bank visit, the parking lot conversation, the house trip back in Chapter 1, the bank folder of Chapter 2. Everything mapped. Just before midnight I sent an anonymous request to the county records for all documents filed under my name in the last 2 years. I turned off the light and sat in dark listening to the hum of the AC. Then I opened the latest PDF. A property title once listed under both Mom and me had my name missing. Revised. Dated 3 weeks after Mom's funeral. My breath caught. They didn't just erase me now. They started the moment she died. The text arrived early in the morning, on my phone before the coffee pot had even finished brewing. Tierney Wexler is invited to a private reading of the Wexler estate documentation. An unfamiliar number. Uncomfortable tone. No, hope you're well, just the formal notice. My heart sank. It was phrased perfectly to sound like an honor. It also sounded like a trap. I called back. The assistant on the line said, "You were added last minute as a courtesy." A courtesy. My father's courtesy. I dressed for the fight, charcoal blazer, crisp blouse, boots that clicked on the pavement. I left the place I rent downtown Montgomery, the sun barely up, and drove the back roads toward Atlanta. My thoughts climbed the scoreboard. He handed me a folder in the farmhouse kitchen. I captured that folder in Chapter 1. In Chapter 2 I saw the forged signature. Chapter 3 exposed the declaration erasing me. Today's meeting felt like the gate to everything. I played back my lawyer friend's words. Don't react. Just record everything. My intention. Not anger yet, but clarity. Walking into the law firm's conference room felt like walking into a hive. Leather chairs, wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling windows showing Atlanta's skyline, but all I noticed was the table. My father sat at the head. On his left, Daniel. On his right, Uncle Alan. Two men I didn't know sat farther down, the kind of men who keep silent because silence is money. Mr. Harrow, the estate lawyer, gestured to the water glasses. I declined. I didn't want civility. I needed truth. He began reading aloud. Revised will dated March 23 following the passing of Patricia Wexler. I felt the words like a punch in the gut. Then, due to concerns of Tierney Wexler's emotional stability, control of inheritance shall transfer to. My voice cut through the calm. Was I ever consulted before my stability became negotiable? The room froze. My father looked small. My brother shifted. Uncle Alan cleared his throat, too late. Mr. Harrow hesitated. Then he slid a second document across the table, ink bold, stamp large, the word void stamped diagonally. There's a discrepancy in the power of attorney forms, he read. A new will was drafted but never filed officially. My father's face turned pale. This wasn't the plan. I raised my phone and quietly took a photo of the void stamp. Behind me I felt the ghosts of my mother's words. Don't let them speak for you when you've got your own voice. That voice hit me like a cold wave. I didn't care about property anymore. I cared about agency. I cared about me. Daniel tried to downplay the scene. Tierney, this is all procedural. You know how delicate things were after Mom died. I snapped back. I was grieving, not incompetent. There's a legal difference. Uncle Alan smiled, too smooth. We're just keeping the family legacy intact. I didn't respond. I looked at each man. Each file. Each half smile. Every pause. They thought silence would quiet me. Instead, I used it. I asked precise questions about dates, witnesses, notary names. I sounded like a legal eagle stalking prey. When the meeting neared its end, the silent file shuffle began. As Mr. Harrow rose, a folder dropped off the table, crack of wood on stone. A label peeked out. M. I picked it up. Handwriting familiar, my mother's. The note inside read, if anything happens to me, Tierney is to have full access to the house fund. I don't trust them. They called it a draft. I called it truth. I tucked the note into my bag. It felt like carrying a final piece of her. I stood, voice steady. Until I review all documentation independently, no signature from me is valid. A paralegal by the door leaned in quietly. You should ask about the summerhouse deed. It was changed too. The words perimetered around me like a warning and a promise. I nodded. No thank yous. No pleasantries. I walked out through the glass doors into Atlanta's morning glare. This meeting wasn't meant for me, but I made it mine. I walked into the records office with my mother's letter in one hand. The envelope felt heavier than I expected. I'd carried it from the house, from the law firm, to this place in Atlanta. The waiting room smelled like old paper and hushed conversations. A clerk looked up when I gave my name, Wexler, and for a brief moment her eyes softened. Then she asked, calm but with a hint of reserve, what I needed. I said, Summerhouse Estate property records. She nodded and disappeared into the back. I sat in a folding chair, the letter now pressed against my chest like armor. My palms were damp. My breath was steady. I wasn't here to cry. I was here to see. When she returned, she placed a large brown folder on the table. The label said, Summerhouse Estate, Revision Files. I realized I was shaking. I opened the folder and my name was right there, typed and then crossed out in blue ink. Under it, my brother's name scrawled like a signature in someone else's drama. The date, 2 weeks after my mother died. My father's signature below, a notarized seal beside it. They had transferred what belonged to me, what Mom had left for me, and no one bothered to tell me. The clerk watched quietly, folding her arms. Then she said softly, You're not the first to question this. I looked at her. Who else? She sighed. Your mother's nurse, Mrs. Calhoun, she came here last year. She didn't file anything. That night I drove to Decatur to find Mrs. Calhoun. Her apartment smelled of lavender and memories. She held a wooden box and said my mother asked her to keep it safe. Inside was a letter addressed to me and a copy of the original deed, my name, Mom's name, notarized. She told me you'd do what's right, the nurse said. The words landed like a hammer. The betrayal was intentional. It wasn't mistake or accident. It was plotted. By late evening I sat in Aidan's office with papers spread out like evidence. He read in silence, then looked at me. This is fraud, he said. Not just forgery. My throat clenched. I'd thought I was gathering scraps. But I had something real. He warned me about the fallout. Filing would expose everything. They'll pick you apart, he said. But you already know who they are. At home I found the cracked cup I'd kept from the farmhouse kitchen, the one my father always called, just a crack. I poured tea and held the cup until the room faded. My mother's words from the letter echoed in my mind. When they take from you, don't become like them. Win with truth. I whispered to the cup, it still holds. And so do I. Then my phone rang. Aiden. Tierney, the witness is ready to meet, but he wants it at your father's house. I sat in the dark, the city lights just beyond the window. Back where it started. Back where every mask was drawn. I stood, folding the letter carefully. This time I wasn't going to run. I stepped through the front door of the estate just as dusk settled over Buckhead. The house looked the same, stone steps, heavy wood doors, the kind of facade built to last generations. But I wasn't walking in as the quiet daughter anymore. I had changed. My father's message had said only family discussion, 6 p.m. sharp. That tone brought back every time I was told to hush, to obey. Now I wore a tailored blazer and held my head up high. The presence of his guests, board members, old friends, didn't intimidate me. The living room, with its large windows and view of the skyline, carried silent expectations. My father cleared his throat and said, "We just want to clear the air, Tierney." I looked around at these same walls that once held my fears, and I answered, "Clear or calibrate? I want to know which." The change in the room was instant. Eyes shifted. My father's forced smile flickered. I stood tall. I belonged here. I took the envelope from my purse, the one sealed with my mother's waxed daisy, and placed it on the coffee table. My brother leaned back, arms crossed. My stepmother's expression softened but lacked conviction. "You told me that folder changed everything," I said. "Well, this one shatters it." I pulled out the documents, my name clearly printed in Mom's handwriting on the original deed, notarized, unaltered. Then I read the clause aloud. "In the event of my passing, Tierney Wexler shall assume full ownership." I paused, letting the voices behind me stir. My brother's voice cut in. "You're making a scene." I turned slowly toward him. "Scenes are for actors," I said. "This is evidence." My stepmother's voice hovered. "Tierney, we had no idea you even cared about the summer house." I looked at her steadily. I cared because it was mine, and because it was Mom's trust in me. The drapes behind me drew closed. The city lights flickered on outside, framing the confrontation. My father rose, an action of authority, and his voice wavered slightly. "You're attacking your family." I didn't flinch. "Attacking? I'm protecting myself from being erased." My brother stood too, stepping into my space. "You're either with us or against us." "I'm neither with you nor against you," I replied. "I'm for myself." A long pause settled. Uncle Alan cleared his throat. "This is not how we do things." The respect in his voice surprised me. Maybe they saw me differently now. I took a step forward. "I won't be the silent pillar anymore. I want full access to the deeds, the accounts, the correspondence, or I walk away." The air thickened. I felt the power shift from control to possibility. My father's tone dropped to cold menace. "If you continue, you'll be cut out entirely." I reached into my purse and drew out the nurse's letter, placing that too on the table. "Then you'll have to explain why this says otherwise. I've retained counsel and will file if forced." My brother's face paled and anger flickered behind his eyes. My stepmother stood abruptly, bracelets jangling. "You'll regret this, Tierney." I didn't respond verbally. Instead I held my gaze. I remained seated, composed. She stormed out. The moment her heels hit the floor it felt like a door closing. I was no longer reacting, I was leading. The city skyline glowed outside the window. My phone buzzed on the couch. I glanced at the message. They sent an old photo. "It changes everything." I picked up the envelope, the documents, and stood. The room watched. I didn't need to say goodbye. I walked out into the night, the quiet house behind me heavy with secrets, which I was done carrying. I arrived at the library just after 9 at night. The hallway lights were low, the hush of the estate deeper than I'd ever known. I carried 3 thick binders, Files A Tierney, Files B Wexler, Files C Backup, and each one felt like armor in my hands. Inside the library, the cards were dealt. My lawyer, Aidan, sat at the long mahogany table. Mrs. Calhoun, steady as ever, watched from the window's reflection. The city lights glowed behind us like distant witnesses. I breathed in the room's weight. Tomorrow morning, I said, we present document by document. Aidan leaned forward. This is your reclamation, or their downfall. I felt the surge. Finally I was writing the narrative instead of reacting. Mrs. Calhoun nodded once. I set the binders on the table in front of me and let the rustle of paper fill the silence. We worked long into the night, planning strategy, confirming details, marking witnesses. By the time I left the library, the moon had climbed high above the estate. I walked alone across the lawn, under a sky that once held comfort and now held purpose. At dawn I found myself walking past the summer house, the cracked cup memory from Mother held in my pocket. The mirrors of the old hallway, the one we passed without a word years ago, flashed in my mind. I pulled out my phone and filmed the exterior, zoomed in on the name on the deed, now in my brother's name. I replaced the file image in my phone. But as I turned to walk back, I noticed camera lights installed around the grounds. Hidden lenses, discreet but obvious enough to mean someone was watching. I froze. They're still guarding secrets, I whispered. The wind stirred. I felt a mild fear, but steadied it. I remembered Mother's words, win with truth. I swallowed and walked back to the house, the sun just breaking over Atlanta's skyline, promising confrontation. By 9 in the morning the board meeting convened. The room was full, father, brother, uncle, lawyers, watchers. I stood uninvited at the head of the table. I held up the nurse's note. Mom saw this coming, I said. The father stuttered. My brother glared. Aidan stood quietly behind me. I handed over the disclosure file. You filed a will you never filed. You transferred property you never owned. You changed my name behind my back. My voice didn't shake. I watched them change. The father's face paled. My brother's stare dropped. The windows behind him framed the city like silent judges. I stepped forward. You built trust on silence. I'm building mine on truth. Suddenly the door burst open. The paralegal from Chapter 7 rushed in holding a faxed image, old photo showing my brother standing in the summer house the night after Mother died. The room gasped. My brother lunged, tried to stop the machine. Aidan's eyes fixed on the paper. My father slammed his hand on the table. You had no right to bring that. I held his gaze. You had no right to take what wasn't yours. The hidden camera lights flickered off somewhere beyond the room. I realized. Someone knew this was coming. The turning had begun. I leaned forward and declared, I'm filing for full recall of the property and an open audit on every transaction you made in my name. They sat frozen. My father's chair scraped back. My brother looked like a man caught before dawn. Uncle Alan excused himself and walked out. The board meetings dissolved into murmurs. The security doors locked. And I sat calm, like a fissure in what was once unbreakable. I looked at the cracked cup in the folder I'd brought. It was still holding, and so was I. Mrs. Calhoun handed me a small key. Your mother set up a safe deposit box years ago, she said quietly. I took it without smiling. My fingers closed around the metal. My mind already raced ahead. I stood, gathered the documents, and walked back toward the hallway. The city lights outside glowed like a victory already given. I inserted the key into the box lock and heard the click. My heart skipped. Inside lay another folder. For Tierney, do not open until needed. I held it gently. The tension was still thick, but the move was made. The checkmate was within reach. I woke early to the gentle sound of geese calling across the lake. The cabin's wood siding creaked in the autumn breeze, and I sat on the porch swing with the folder resting on my lap, the one marked, do not open until needed. For so long I'd kept moving, fighting, hiding. But here, I finally felt ready. The air was cool and steady, the dawn pale and honest. The lake reflected trees turning gold and red. I inhaled deeply, remembering how this place was my mother's refuge, not a hideaway, but a place of knowing. I opened the folder, the seal cracking quietly in my fingers. Inside were letters in her familiar blue ink, a deed transfer, and her final words. Beneath the weight of everything, I allowed myself a moment of calm. I wasn't escaping the past, I was stepping beyond it. Her letter was short. Dear Tierney, if you're reading this, you won, but more importantly, you endured. The handwritten note spoke of legacy, not as land or money, but as clarity of purpose. The deed revealed she had left this lake cabin to me, hidden in a trust the family never saw. I held the paper and read her words, "You were never the weakest. You were just the one who saw too much and said too little." In a second envelope was her wedding ring, with instructions to donate it to a cause she believed in. My throat tightened. I rose from the swing and walked inside, carrying her gifts with care. The sadness settled around me, but so did pride. She had prepared for this, even when I didn't know I needed it. A few days later, I returned to the estate one last time, not to reclaim, but to release. My father stood by the gate as I drove away. He didn't say a word, only gave a nod. I met with Aiden at his office and finalized the dissolution of the Wexler board. It wasn't about vengeance. I chose not to press criminal charges. I asked for restitution, for transparency. As I signed the final papers, I whispered a quote I found in my mother's notebook. "Justice is not revenge, it's balance." The weight in my chest lessened. I left the office feeling the solid calm of someone who decided what they wanted, and accepted what they couldn't change. At the cemetery I placed a copy of her letter beneath her nameplate. Patricia Tierney Wexler. The one who watched the storm and still grew roots. My brother didn't appear. I stood alone for a moment in the crisp air and said aloud, "You gave me strength, not inheritance." In that instant, the emergency fund they once treated like a loan didn't feel like theft anymore, it felt like a trade. With my head held high, I walked away. The autumn leaves rustled under my step, and I realized the past had less power over me now. Back at the cabin, I began writing. Not the big bestseller, but a letter to myself, a memoir, maybe, or just a record for someone I hoped would follow. I called Mrs. Calhoun, and for the first time we shared laughter, not tears. I opened the fridge. Just lemonade, nothing else. I smiled at the simplicity. Sometimes survival is the best inheritance, I whispered to the lake outside. The water shimmered, and my reflection looked like my mother's, a woman who knew what she wanted. I felt gentle empowerment settling in my bones. The fight was over, and I was left with truth, strength, and quiet peace. Late in the evening, my phone buzzed. A message from Aiden. "You might want to check this. Someone reopened the trust under your name." My breath caught. I folded the letter from Mother one more time. The past still reached, but this time I was ready.